My guest today isn't just a great actor. He's someone who thinks deeply about what it means to be creative today and tomorrow.
Computers soon will be able to generate content that will make people laugh, that will make people cry. It'll be able to generate content that will win all the likes, all the awards, all these quantifiable measures. But here's the thing we have to hold on to. That's not what art's about.
So what is art all about, according to Joseph Gordon-Levitt? Well, you're about to find out. Plus, why he describes himself as guarded.
More than I'd like to be.
He'll talk about what it was like to work with Daniel Day-Lewis on Lincoln and empathizing with characters he plays who are sometimes dark and evil.
I tend to be drawn to stuff that does have some of that darkness.
So let's jump right into my conversation with Joseph Gordon-Levitt, starting with AI.
We're heading into an era where the technology itself is going to start making the art, right? This whole generative AI thing is something I'm very interested in and have become a little bit of an expert on. And one of the important differences, I think, between what a human can do and what an AI can and especially will be able to do has to do with this winning and losing question. An AI will only ever see things in that kind of black and white, quantifiable winning and losing. That's the only way that a computer can compute the art. And computers soon will be able to generate content, if you will. I wouldn't use the word art, but will be able to generate content that will make people laugh. It'll be able to generate content that will make people cry. It'll be able to generate content that will win all the likes, all the awards, all these quantifiable measures.
It'll be as good as, or almost appear to be as good as a film.
And what you just said is exactly the question. It all depends on how you define good.
Yeah.
And if we're defining good by quantifiable measures where there are winners and losers, who has the most likes, who has the most views, who has the most popularity, who has the highest Rotten Tomatoes score, who has the blah, 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 blah. What are the numbers? What's the quantifiable measurement of this good art? AI will probably start winning in all of those quantifiable measures. But here's the thing we have to hold on to. That's not what art's about. That's what Silicon Valley wants us to think the art's about.
Yeah.
And if you go up to Silicon Valley and you talk to a tech person and they and try to talk to them about art, first of all, they won't use the word art. They'll use the word content. And they won't really believe you when you say that there's value in something that probably can't be measured in numbers.
Right.
And you know what? They're fucking wrong. And we artists need to know that they're wrong and need to tell them they're wrong. And one of the things I'm worried about is that we're all so addicted to these social media platforms that quantify everything, that tell us in numbers, in stark numbers, how good is your art. That we're going to start believing Silicon Valley when they tell us that our art is nothing more than numbers, than content that can be measured by numbers. And so I actually think it's sort of crucial for the survival of art itself in a way. The tradition that goes back thousands of years to the dawn of humanity, of what art is. It's crucial that we maintain an understanding of art beyond those numbers, beyond winners and losers, and the sort of binary black and white of who's hot and who's popular and who stole the scene from whom, and all of those kind of competitive terms. That's not what art and creativity is. It's something more magical than that.
Amen. That's all I can say. That's all I can say. And I think that people don't like the word soul because it evokes religion, or if they do like it, but there's a soullessness around the potential of what that could be. And I think you're right. Like, we have to bear that in mind because the future is going to look radically different than the present. And unless we make decisions about what we want to preserve, we're going to lose it.
I couldn't agree more.
Let's talk about the beginning. You grew up in the Valley. I grew up in the Valley too, by the way.
You did?
I did in Northridge.
Where in the Valley did you grow up?
Northridge. I went to Chatsworth High School.
Oh, man, I had a bunch of friends who lived in Northridge. I was always driving up down the 118 to see my friends who went to Granada High.
Granada High.
Chatsworth was right there, sure.
Yep. So I know intimately where you grew up. Your parents, I kind of know where they come from because they met at KPFK. I started NPR. KPFK is like the super left-wing version of NPR at the time. And so
and
you
still
grew up,
is.
It still is. So you grew up, I have to imagine, in a pretty politically charged household.
3 cheers for public radio. Yeah, man. And we had books on Watergate and stuff on the shelves because my dad reported on that. And and my mom ran for Congress on the Peace and Freedom Party, which is a party that still exists.
It still exists. I don't know if they've ever won a seat, but
no, I don't think so. But I guess what they say about the Overton window, and you need to have those outliers pushing the boundaries of where the conversation is. And that was my mom back in the, I guess, early 70s.
This was before you were born. She ran for Congress.
This is before I was born, talking about, ending the Vietnam War and civil rights and women's rights and things like that. Yeah.
And clearly, this is much more common now, but you have the 2 last names, one from your mother, Gordon, one from your dad, Levitt.
That's right. Jane Gordon and Dennis Levitt.
And so they combined their names, which was really progressive in the early 80s when you were born.
Indeed, and has made bureaucracy an extra pain in the ass for me throughout my entire life.
I'm sure. My wife has 2 last names too from both her parents, and trying to get that when you're getting an airline ticket is always a nightmare.
It's a spiel. You just have to have a spiel. When someone at a desk asks me my name, I don't just tell them. I say, it's a hyphenated last name, Gordon-Levitt, so it could be under G or it could be under L. That's what I always say.
Now
and you know what?
Chance.
It's worth it. I don't mind the spiel because I actually really enjoy having both of my parents' last names. I don't know how I would feel if I only had one.
All right. So you grew up in the San Fernando Valley, and did you? Did you? Gravitate towards acting as a kid? Was that something that you just found somehow?
It was. I did lots of kind of after-school activities. I did piano lessons in Little League and gymnastics and things like that. And then the music teacher that was teaching piano lessons, she also taught a choir. Her name was Miss Karen. And then she also started teaching these musical theater classes where the kids would put on a musical like Guys and Dolls or Peter Pan or whatever. And I just really loved doing it. I loved Miss Karen's class. She was a wonderful teacher. I don't think it would be possible to overemphasize how important she is in this equation, because if I were in some community theater class with, a teacher who wasn't as special as she, I'm sure I wouldn't have been nearly as inspired, and I probably wouldn't have ended up doing what I did with my whole life. I give enormous credit to her and to teachers all over. I just think it's probably the most underrated profession and creative job in the whole world. We talk about creatives, so to speak. What's more creative than standing up in front of a class of 20 or 30 or 40 kids and being able to hold their attention and tell them a story and get them interested and inspired and do it every day, and have them learn something? That's so much more magnificent an accomplishment, I feel like, than entertaining an audience for an hour and a half in a movie or a half hour in a show like what I do. So I really have enormous admiration for teachers. Anyway, that's a tangent. But yeah, so Miss Karen was a big part of me eventually finding the love of acting.
I'm curious about charisma, right? Because you, like a lot of people who we've had on the show, grew up in Hollywood families, like had parents who were actors. This is a common story in Hollywood, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's like there are a lot of athletes in the NBA whose parents played in the NBA, right? It makes sense, right? There's a
and I do have it in my family, actually, even though it's neither of my parents were in show business, but my mom's dad was. He was a film director. His name was Michael Gordon. And he directed some great movies, Cyrano de Bergerac and Pillow Talk and other things. And then he was blacklisted. So the lefty history goes deeper.
Oh, wow. So
he
when
was
did
blacklisted in the McCarthy era.
So and that was the end of his career?
It wasn't, actually. So he was blacklisted after Cyrano de Bergerac, which was probably his most renowned movie.
Yeah.
And he had to stop working for, I think it was 7 or 10 years or something like that. He moved back east to be with his family. And then after the McCarthy era sort of blew over, he was able to come back to Hollywood and do more work. And that's when he did Pillow Talk, which is another one of his most famous movies, but a much different kind of movie, like a decidedly sort of light movie. And I think he felt, and I never got to know him, but I'm inferring here, I think he felt like he should probably chill out and just, make, the lighter fare, because that's what happens when your government comes down on you and says, hey, because you went to these lefty political meetings, you're not allowed to have a job anymore.
So he died before you were born?
He died when I was 10.
Okay.
And so I spent a little bit of time with him, but I never got to talk with him about film or theater or drama or anything like that, because I think I was a little young. And I think, to be honest, he was, from what I remember and from what like my mom and my aunt and uncle tell me, he was sort of an old-fashioned kind of man that wasn't one to like get down on the floor with a kid. And if he had lived a little longer, I always wish that he had lived till I was like maybe 14 or 15, when I was first like trying on my intellectual pants and tried my hand at saying something smart with him and seeing what he would say. But yeah, he died before that.
Back to this idea of charisma. I know that, you started acting and going to auditions very young, as a young kid. And you mentioned, going to after-school programs and acting camps and things like that. And did you feel naturally charismatic? Like, was it easy for you to stand up and just present and perform, or did you have to find that?
That's a funny question. I don't think I thought about it then. But I think in hindsight, what I've heard is that it was something that came kind of naturally to me. And as a dad, I feel like I'm aware of this kind of nature versus nurture dynamic more than I've ever been. And so when I hear stories about, when you were 5 years old, you stood up on a table at Knott's Berry Farm and you sang a song and everyone listened. That's a story my parents tell me. I, to be perfectly honest, don't remember doing that. But I guess it wasn't something that I was thinking about or aware of when you're that young. I think as you get older, you go through adolescence, or you're in adulthood and you're a performer, you're thinking about this all the time. Oh, what do they think of me? Or like, am I cut out for this? Or these kinds of questions. Luckily, you don't think about them too much when you're 6. You
just weren't shy.
Yeah, I guess not. As far as I remember. There's one of my favorite stories from this early part of my, I guess you could say, career, but it was the first audition I ever went on, and I did have a shy moment. And I had, like I said, been in this community theater group, and because I grew up in the Valley, there were some kids in my community theater group that went on auditions for commercials and TV shows and stuff. And so I ended up going on an audition for a commercial. It was a Red Lobster commercial. Mm-hmm. and I was supposed to sing a song, and I had my song prepared, and I had practiced it with Miss Karen and with my mom, and I went into the audition, and I was supposed to sing, and I didn't. I do remember this pretty vividly. I just couldn't do it. And they invited my mom into the audition room, and she kind of held my hand and sang the song with me, and I ended up singing it. And the extraordinary thing that happened was the casting director, who's sort of it's the casting director's job to, work on the casting, and before even showing the director options to kind of do the first round of auditions. And the casting director came up to me after I had 100% bungled this audition and looked me right in the eye and said, "That was great." And made me feel wonderful. And I walked out of the audition with my mom and turned to her and said, "Mom, I think I got a shot." I actually said that.
It's like a movie
heard
line.
From my mom that's what I said that. And I know it's funny how as the father of kids that age, it's funny the movie lines they come out with. But this is the thing. That casting director, he didn't have to be so generous. I was kind of wasting his time. He had lots of kids to see that day, and he took the time to invite my mom in, to let me finish my song, and to tell me that I had done a good job and make sure that I had a positive experience. It's out of the ordinary, I'll say that. In Hollywood, people are generally not looking out for everybody's feelings. And if that guy had done what he would normally do, which is stop, okay, next, go, and sort of dismissed me, I would have walked out of there feeling awful, and I probably never would have gone on another audition. And I, again, wouldn't have done what I did. And I don't know who that guy is, but what a lovely, kind act that had such an enormous impact on my life that he took an extra 2 minutes out of his day to make a huge difference to this 6-year-old.
Tell me about, as a child already, as a kid, 6, 7, 8 years old, you started to get bit parts on shows big shows, Family Ties. Mm-hmm. And then, later on when you were, I think, 9 or 10, China Beach. These were huge network TV shows at the time. And at the same time, again, you didn't come – grandfather, but you weren't in a Hollywood acting family.
Right.
Your mom was driving you from the Valley to whatever, Burbank or wherever you had to do auditions, mm-hmm. right? I guess Burbank is sort of in the Valley. But you were being driven all over but also trying to go to school and be a student. And what was that like for you? Were there just lots of kids like you at school, or were you sort of I don't know, did you feel there are probably advantages to it, but maybe even disadvantages being a kid and being also, kind of the sort of, oh, that was the kid in Family Ties last week.
Yeah. Yeah, you're describing my young life's neuroses to a T. It's exactly what my first world problems were when I was a kid. And everybody, I think, has their thing when they're a kid that they're, that makes them different, that they're worried that other people are going to single them out or judge them or whatever. And I was always, really nervous that the other kids would treat me differently or even kind of think I was something that I wasn't, or not be honest with me, tell me that they wanted to be my friend when they didn't really want to be my friend or something like that. And it really hung me up for a long time. And I guess it still does in certain ways.
How
a lot
so?
less now. Well, I would say I'm probably a fairly guarded person socially, more than I'd like to be. I consider myself, a warm and friendly guy, but I think when I'm first meeting people, I'm bad at being outgoing and yeah, just like accessible from, I don't know, a bunch of bad habits or just built up distrust or enough people that have been shitty over the years or whatever. And it's something I continue to work on, just trying to not get hung up on that and be, open and friendly person.
I mean, it's a bit of a digression, and we'll come back to the timeline, but I'm just curious, kind of double clicking on this for a moment. I mean, you've been in the public eye since you were like 6, basically, and kind of, well known since you were really in your teens, right? 10 Things I Hate About You. That was a big role. And so you've been in this quote unquote Hollywood world. You've sort of been famous for a long time. But I'm wondering about your self-image. Do you feel uncomfortable even now, even having done all the things you've done and all the films you've been in at where you are in life now? Do you still feel like you're an outsider in that world?
Yeah, if we're talking about that world, like the Hollywood world of fame or glitz or glamour or whatever, I'm probably, I have a lot of negative feelings towards it, and maybe even more than is fair. And it would be fair to have a lot of negative feelings towards Hollywood. It's a pretty awful culture. The culture of fame and glitz and glamour. It's very much wrapped up in money and elitism and a sort of a food chain of who's better than who and who's more popular and who's more pretty and who's more bankable and all this pretty toxic stuff that will make you unhappy if you put too much stake in it. And so I think because I realized pretty young, with the help of some healthy guidance, I think, from my family and others, that I didn't want to care about what that world thought. And I didn't want to feel at home in that Hollywood world. And I didn't want other people to perceive me as someone from that Hollywood world, that I've probably overcompensated. And so that's still something I'm like working on. When I was like a teenager, for example, if someone came up and said like, "Oh, I know you. You're from Third Rock from the Sun," or like you said, 10 Things I Hate About You, I would give them a deadpan look and lie and pretend that I didn't know what they were talking about and not let it go and like full on carry on and act as if they were mistaken. Why was I doing that? Why couldn't I have just said, "Oh, thanks"? And that's what I do now, But when I was 17. I had this, this fear that Hollywood would infect me or something, and I was so against it.
I mean, you say that you really maybe overcompensated for that, but at the same time, like what you got out of it, I think, has been a career where you could more or less accept roles that you wanted to play, become a widely respected actor, but then like even in your personal life, you don't have a dramatic personal life. You're not in tabloids. You're not dating a million people. Like you have a stable marriage and family, and like you kind of have like a very different stability that many famous people didn't get to have for a variety of reasons.
Sure. Yeah, it's important to me to make sure that I have a sort of a boundary around a certain, like my real self.
Yeah.
And that my real self is not a performance for an audience. I love performing for an audience. I love telling a story or playing a character. But as soon as I need to have a me that's not a story or a character or a performance for them. Because if I don't have that, then what have I got? Is I guess how it seems to me. So I'm pretty protective of, I guess you could say, my privacy with my family, with my kids and my wife, etc. For that reason, I think it's a recipe for insanity. I also have friends that are more forthcoming about their personal lives and are perfectly happy and healthy and cool. So it's different strokes for different folks, as they say. But for me, I need those boundaries.
When you going back to the sort of the timeline, I read from a pretty early age you were kind of fixated, and maybe fixated isn't the right word because I think there's a negative connotation with that word, but let's just for shorthand use that word, on really doing roles that you felt were worthwhile doing. And I don't mean in the sense that you thought you were dismissive, but you didn't want to do roles that you felt were just cheap or I don't know the right description. Is that fair to say that you really wanted serious roles? And sometimes it's not, you don't always have a choice, right? Especially when you're starting out.
That's right. Yeah, well, I guess by the time I finished high school, I had been on a sitcom for a number of years and been on, in this successful
Third Rock from the Sun.
Yeah, Third Rock from the Sun, and then like in a successful like teen rom-com with 10 Things I Hate About You, and it was this this sort of juxtaposition with the movies that I loved watching, which were like Sundance movies. I loved watching Sling Blade and Swingers and Trees Lounge and Living in Oblivion and Reservoir Dogs and Do the Right Thing and these kinds of movies.
You were a precocious kind of movie snob teenager.
Yeah, I was
Fair enough.
And fully snobby about it. So when I got done with that TV show, all I wanted to do was like low budget indie dramas that were, headed for Sundance, and no one thought that was something I could do. With fair reason, I had never really demonstrated an ability to do that. But that's all I wanted to do. And the message I was getting from my, professional life was, hey, you'll make a lot of money if you, do another sitcom or do another one of these movies. Or just, these are the jobs that we can offer you, and they're really good jobs and they'll pay you a lot. But I didn't want to do them. And look, partially, I would say that's privilege right there. That's luck. I happened to be in a situation where my dad earned a good living. I didn't have to support my family. I could afford to not work. And that's what I did for a while, is not work. I auditioned for all these indie movies and didn't get the part over and over and over and over and over again. And that's not something that everyone can afford to do. So I don't want to be too self-congratulatory about that choice. But that was the choice I was able to make.
I mean, as you know, the track record of child actors is not good, right? That they aren't often able to translate that into a long career. And there are some notable exceptions, right? Ron Howard and others and you. I wonder when you decided to go to college, because you went to university, you went to Columbia.
Yeah.
Was part of it in your mind, or maybe in your parents' mind, thinking you better, because at that point you'd had a really successful acting career, but was part of it maybe in your mind like, well, this might not last because the track record isn't very good. And at a certain point in Hollywood, somebody can just say, yeah, Joseph Gordon-Levitt was great as a kid, but as an adult, he just doesn't translate. Was that part of the thinking of maybe, I don't know, shifting into a different career path?
Yeah, that's funny. For some reason or another, I don't know that I really thought of it that way. That would be the sensible way to think about it, to be honest. I think the way that I thought about it, and maybe this was just my own masking of what you're really saying underlying it, but the way I thought about it was a lot of my friends were finishing high school, some going off to college, some going off and doing other things, and almost all of them were sort of at the beginning of something. They were setting off to figure out what they were going to do. And I wanted that. I didn't like the idea of, I'm just going to keep doing the same thing I've been doing ever since I was a kid. I already made that decision. That decision, my 6-year-old self made that decision for me. I wanted to sort of own that decision-making process. And so it seemed like the best thing to do was to quit acting for a while and go to college and come back to acting if I wanted to, and not if I found something else. And I actually came back to it a lot quicker than I thought I was going to.
You did a bunch of films while you were a student, while you were, I guess,
kind of, yeah. Well, the last movie I did before leaving for college, I finally got to do my dramatic indie movie, which was called Manic.
Mm-hmm.
And it took a while for it to make its way out into the world, but it played at Sundance while I was a freshman, I believe, in college. And I finally got that Sundance experience that I'd always wanted. And so that was part of it. And the other part was I got a copy of Final Cut Pro.
Oh, yes.
Which had just become like a lot more accessible. Final Cut Pro is video editing software.
Yeah.
The kind of thing that is lickety-split easy to do on your phone nowadays. Back then, it was a big deal that you could have it on your own desktop computer at home. Because before that, video editing software was only something that professionals had, in professional settings.
You could do like amazing things like dissolves and remember how long it used to take to render your file?
To render and
end?
dissolve, yeah.
Yes.
But I mean, I used to, when I was a little kid, we would make videos on camcorders, on first VHS tapes and then on high 8 tapes and then on like mini DV cassettes. But I used to try to edit the videos that we were making using 2 VCRs, just dubbing what you shot on the camcorder in the right order onto the VHS and like trying to edit. And then there was even there was a trick to try to put music on it because there wasn't like an easy way to put music on what you made. So we literally would we would cut the video onto a VHS by dubbing from the camcorder onto a VHS tape, and then
hitting stop.
We would play the VHS tape back on TV with a boombox playing the music that we wanted, and then record that with the camcorder. Point the camcorder at the TV with the boombox's music. So anyway, it was all I wanted when I was a kid was to be able to edit. And then finally, I was turning 21, and it was I think Final Cut Pro version like 3 or something was one of the first versions that was like really usable. And it was the first time I ever got a Mac. I had been using PCs up to that point my whole life, and I started teaching myself how to edit. And this is, if you ask any filmmaker, the cliche is you make a movie 3 times. Once in the script phase, once when you're shooting, and once when you're editing. The editing is at least as important as any of the other parts. And if you're not editing what you've made, it's not really filmmaking. Mm-hmm. And so I had spent my whole life acting in things that I didn't get to edit. And then other people would edit my performance and sometimes craft a performance that seemed good. And sometimes it felt to me like not so good because the edit can completely make or break a performance. It's the editor who's deciding how long is that pause?
Yeah.
What take are we going to use? When do you, it's so much of the performance is crafted in the edit. And so finally getting to edit was a huge moment for me. And that's when I decided to drop out of college, drop out of university and say, I want to make movies. It was when I finally learned how to edit.
You decided that you wanted to actually be behind the camera?
Yeah. That was why I dropped out of school. It wasn't because I wanted to act again. It was because I wanted to make my own movies.
That wouldn't happen for many more years later.
You're right. It took a while.
Yeah.
Well, it took a while to make a feature film, but I was making lots of little short films and videos and stuff, and that's what became Hit Record, which was, ended up being this online community that we can talk about later or not. But So I did start making things right away. And in fact, anytime anybody asked me, hey, I want to make movies, what should I do first? I would say, okay, first of all, forget about making a feature film for a while. Make short things, make little things. And it's interesting because nowadays on social media, everything's tends short, which has its ups and downs. I think it's actually really good to be concise and not bite off more than you can chew. I think it's bad to constantly be sort of catering to short attention span and you know the rat race popularity contest of social media. But my advice tends to be make a short film and then make a dozen more before you start thinking about making a feature film.
I want to ask you about. It's a terrible way to ask a question. I want to ask you about, because you're going to ask the question. You don't have to preface it with "I want to ask you." So let me just
How
say,
dare you, man?
let me just ask, which is, Manic. I think Manic was a turning point for you because that was a darker role. It was a serious, sort of heavy role, right? And
Yeah.
in the next couple of years, you would play some darker characters, right? Mysterious Skin. You played a gay prostitute. You were in Latter Days, where you were a gay Mormon missionary.
A homophobic Mormon missionary
Right,
was my part. But yeah.
Forgive me. Right, sexually repressed. Right, right, homophobic who falls for his neighbor. You were in Brick as well. Tell me about becoming those kind of darker characters. I mean, here you were like this kind of bright, sunny Third Rock from the Sun. You know, the 10 Things I Hate About You. Like, there was a brightness and a sunniness to the character that you appeared on screen as. And then Manic was, I think, a turning point for a while.
Yeah. Well, Manic was the movie that I did. Yeah, that first one that went to Sundance. And that's the one that, like you said, Greg Araki, who directed Mysterious Skin, and Ryan Johnson, who directed Brick, they both cast me in their movies because they saw me in Manic. And then those movies were really the movies that then sent me off to the rest of my career. And you're right, they're darker than what you see on a sitcom or on a rom-com. Darkness and lightness is funny. I find stuff that's overly light more depressing and uncomfortable. I personally, my taste is, I find it more kind of warm and maybe relatable when there's a good mix of dark and light, because that's the way the world is and that's the way life is. And maybe that's because for a lot of people, they want to watch a movie and a show and they want to forget about the real world or real life. And that's a perfectly understandable way to want to watch a movie or a show. And maybe just for whatever reason, because I've been involved with it or just that's my taste, I don't know. When I watch a movie and a show, I'm looking for something more than an escape or a distraction. I'm not a religious person. And that might sound like a funny segue, but I think we all are looking for something meaningful, something sacred, something to answer some of those big questions like, who am I and why am I here and am I a good person and what's the point of all this? And I look for that in movies and books and songs and stories. Like, that's where I find it. That's where I've always found it. And so movies and shows that are just kind of like light and funny and there for a laugh, or you can put them on in the background and you don't have to think about them too much, they don't scratch that itch for me. They don't provide that nourishment that I'm often looking for. So I tend to be drawn to stuff that does have some of that darkness, because if you're going to take on those big questions or provide that, to continue the metaphor, the nourishment, you can't do it just through lightness. It's false. You have to acknowledge the fact that the world is also has some darkness to it.
Are those well, the question, are there harder characters to play? There's a wonderful video that you did with Vanity Fair a year or so ago, and you watch old films of yourself, and you watch 10 Things I Hate About You, which is a very good film. I mean, it's based on Shakespeare, right? And so it's a funny film, and there's a line in that film, and you kind of like roll your eyes watching yourself, and you're like, I'm back in the game. It's like after he kisses the girl, and you kind of cringe hearing that line. But is that harder for you in some ways than playing a dark character to do that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess it depends on what we mean when we say hard and easy. It can be hard. Actually, one of the hardest days, roughest days I've ever had on a set was, and I mean, I was like, had to take a break because I was crying. I was like broken down. Like I can't do this. I hate this. The director had to come sit by me, and what it was a Pop-Tarts commercial because I was just I couldn't do it. I was doing this commercial. There's I guess a longer story here. I generally didn't like doing commercials, even at that age. I think when I did this, I was maybe 11 or something like that. And even back then, I really enjoyed the kind of acting where you're tapping into something real, where you're feeling real feelings, where you're putting yourself in the shoes of another person, of your character, and really trying to embody that character. And I didn't really like the kind of acting that you see in a Pop-Tarts commercial where you have to just force a big smile and say, silly false things. And at that age, though, I was in a position where I could go on auditions and potentially get these parts, and the commercials pay really well. And I think my parents at the time were like, our son doesn't want to do this, and we don't want to make him do this. And it's not that we as the family need the money because, like I said, my dad earned a good living. But as parents, are we remiss in any way if we don't encourage him to take advantage of this opportunity and earn some money for himself? I mean, he might avoid student debt, for example, if he can get a few of these commercials and pay for college, et cetera. So they said, look, you don't have to do any commercials. We will not make you. But if you do 2 commercials that pay, you can buy anything you want. They said this to me when I was like 11.
Yeah.
And so I started going on auditions for commercials, and I got 2 of them, and I bought myself a Street Fighter 2 arcade game.
The big giant one in your house.
The kind you find in an arcade. Yes, because this was before you could play Street Fighter 2 on Super Nintendo.
$2,000-$3,000.
I think that's exactly what it was. I'm surprised you hit it so precisely. Yeah, I think it was about $2,000 or $3,000.
I always wanted one of those.
Yeah, well, because sure, and this is the thing: if you get on a commercial at that time in the '90s, compensation for actors is a very different thing back then. There was a thing called residuals, et cetera, et cetera. You could be making tens of thousands of dollars for 1 or 2 days of work, and so. Yeah, one of the commercials I did was this Pop-Tarts commercial that earned me the Street Fighter 2, but I hated it. And the director just kept pushing me to try to make it bigger, smiling or brighter. And I literally, like I said, I broke down crying, and the set had to stop. It's the only time I've ever had a set have to pause on my account because I was kind of unable to continue. And it was, I think, to do with what you're saying. That it can be hard to be false, and it can be easier to be true. So even though a character like the one in Manic, who's a very troubled character who's in pain, or the character in Mysterious Skin who's undergone horrendous child abuse, because I guess those feelings are honest, I'm going into them with an embrace of it. That's the art of it. That's the challenge, and that's the beauty and the glory and the fulfillment. Whereas just going, look, you've got time for Kellogg's Pop-Tarts. That just, I don't know, it kind of broke my soul a little bit. But I survived.
I think I guess the sort of the magic and the attraction of of acting is you get to be a different personality and a different thing. You know, you can be anything, right? And it's you know, some of the kindest, nicest people in real life play some of the the most vile characters. Are there, out of the characters that you have played, which one do you think most reflects who you actually are?
That's a tough one. Before I answer that, though, can I just, it made me think of something when you talk about acting being the art of sort of putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Another word for that is empathy.
Correct. Yeah.
And I just want to take a second to, sort of in praise of empathy, because, and also in praise of acting. And in particular, it reminds me of how there's a question about whether theater and the dramatic arts belongs in school. It's sort of the first thing that goes when the budgets need to be cut is theater, which is understandable in a way. But let me put it another way. Theater and acting is exactly the practice of trying to understand someone else's point of view, someone other than yourself, and asking yourself and even embodying in yourself, what would it feel like to be this person in this story, different than me? And isn't that what our country and our world in a way is missing most of all? Our country's falling apart because we lack an ability to have empathy for each other. We've got these sort of two, I'm sorry to get political for a second, we've got these two tribes, this blue tribe and this red tribe, that tend to be the ones who live in the city versus the ones who live outside of the city. And they live different lifestyles. And at this point, we're supposed to fucking hate each other. And it's tearing our country apart. Yep. It's allowing authoritarians to rise up and take advantage of the rift. And if someone who grew up in a city could maybe play a character of someone from the country, or someone who grew up outside of a city could maybe play a character of someone from a city, isn't that exactly the kind of healing and process that we need to get past this toxic division that's just bringing us down? It seems to me like if there's one thing we need in schools, it's theater and arts and that kind of practiced empathy. I mean, how the fuck often are you using, cosine and tangent and trigonometry and stuff? Like, I'm all for math and STEM, but I think we really undersell the value of what gets often referred to in a diminutive way as the humanities, especially by tech folks who think the humanities are just a bunch of nonsense in general. I'm making a generalization. But I just wanted to kind of, say that to the radio or to anybody who would listen, because there is a really important value that we need more than ever right now.
I agree with you. I mean, I want to get back to the question that I asked you, but just on that point, we had Hilary Swank on the show a couple weeks ago, and of course she played Brandon Tina in Boys Don't Cry, our first Academy Award, and that it was a transgender boy that she played, and with incredible empathy, it was a groundbreaking film when it came out. At the time, nobody was talking about that. But we're also living in a complicated time where there are people who argue, and I'm not going to say whether it's fair or not, but that those roles shouldn't be played by people unless they are actually, and part of me, well, I will take a side. Part of me is frustrated by that because acting is about embodying another human. I mean, this is like, it goes back to Shakespeare, it goes back to the Greek tragedies and dramas. Is you try to embody somebody else, and you may not actually share their life story or their life experience, but you try to bring them to life in an empathetic way.
Yeah, I really see both sides. I very much agree, and I've certainly played lots of characters that are very different from me, and I value that, and I think I did it and always strove to do it in a respectful way. I also do understand the point that, especially for historically marginalized or underrepresented groups of people, that there's a pain involved in seeing people who aren't from that group represent that group,
especially when it's done like Breakfast at Tiffany's, like a
yeah, of course,
disrespectfully.
Yes, that exactly. So I don't know. I see both sides, but I would really agree with you that it would be sad to me if we took the need for representation to such an extreme that it became morally unacceptable to do acting, or what I would consider acting, which is portraying someone you're not. That is what acting is in a lot of ways, is portraying someone you're not. And as long as it's done respectfully, like you said, I think there's still a real value in that. Of course, I also understand there's a question about whether Hollywood is respectful. Hollywood in general is a mercenary, money-hungry, disrespectful industry. And so I can understand why people get mad at Hollywood. But there, yeah. So I really see your point that the empathy and the ability to identify with and even play a character that's different from yourself, I think has real value as well.
All right, so back to the question. Maybe the question shouldn't be who are you most like, but maybe it's which character do you most identify that you have, and you've played and there's too many films to talk about over the course of this interview that you've been in, so we're just going to touch on a few, but I'm curious.
Yeah, well, I really strongly identify with all of them in a way. Mm-hmm. And even ones that are very different from
even the assassins?
Myself. Yeah, for sure. Like, I mean, like I played, I don't know, like an assassin you're talking about.
Looper.
Okay, so Looper, there's certainly parts of me that strongly identify with Looper. Looper's a story about a guy who wants what's his. And that's something anybody can relate to, and I certainly have that. And or I've played like I remember playing the first one that came to my head when you said an assassin, a lesser known movie called Kill Shot, which was actually a really fun movie. It was with Mickey Rourke and Diane Lane, and it's adapted from an Elmore Leonard novel. And I played a complete psycho dude from Texas who's just killing people and blah, like pretty like bad, guy. Do I identify with him? Well, not because I'm killing people and not because I'm from Texas, but because there's a part of me that deep down wants to fucking be wild and be that guy. And, we all have that. Like when I think maybe a more common mode of expression would be you put on some aggressive music and sing along or yell along in the car. That's that part of you. And it's good to get it out. And when I get to play a part like that, that's what I'm doing. So I do relate to that guy. Who's a character that reminds me of me? I mean, so I did a show. I said recently, this show is probably the most me-ish thing that I've ever done. I made a show called Mr. Corman.
Mr. Corman, yeah.
A couple years ago. It came out on Apple. And the character's different from me, but he's also a lot like me. His name is Josh Corman. My name is Joseph Gordon. He walks like me and he talks like me and he grew up where I grew up in the Valley, and it sort of came, that character, from a moment of self-reflection and I guess gratitude. Like, man, I've ended up in this situation where I'm really happy with my work, and I'm happy with my life partner, and I love our kids, and how did I get so fucking lucky?
Yeah.
And you know what? A lot of it really comes down to luck. It could have just as easily gone this way instead of that way, in any number of these forks in the road. And I started sort of thinking about that, and ended up writing this character called Josh Corman, and made a series about him. And so in that way, he's maybe a lot like me, but also really different, and probably no more different than, I don't know, like the first movie I directed was called Don John, where I played this sort of womanizing gym rat porn addict. And I identify with him too, because I'll objectify the world. I've certainly been guilty of objectifying the opposite sex, or objectifying my own body, or objectifying my worldly possessions, all the things that movie's about. I have that in me too, and so I don't know. I guess my answer to your question is, if you're doing it right, in a way, all the characters should have a lot of you in them, even if you're playing someone who's different from you.
Is part of your process in either pursuing or choosing roles, I mean, how much of that is about challenging what you've done? I mean, you've done so many different characters, and you've been so many different people, Edward Snowden, and I'm just, thinking about, I mentioned Looper. I saw Looper recently on an airplane. It was on a,
really?
it was on a long flight, and I really enjoyed it. I'd never heard of the film before,
Oh, good. Thank you. That's one of my favorites for sure.
It's a really good film.
You mentioned Rian Johnson earlier. That's his third movie. Now he's known for making the Knives Out movies.
Right. And I know you had a role in that as a narrator. But, or playing like Lincoln's son, or whatever, all the, the fact that you're able to be in romantic comedies, obviously 500 Days of Summer, and play that kind of character, and then play these really violent, dark characters as well. Where do you kind of look to like push the boundaries of what you can be, and how you can embody something different?
Yeah, that challenge is part of, I think, what inspires me. I did a movie a couple years ago, mostly because I thought it would be really hard, and challenge myself in that way. And it's this movie called 7500, and it was actually the first movie that I did after taking a big break. When I became a dad, I took 2 years off acting, and it was the longest break I'd ever taken ever since I was 6 years old. And for my first job back, I don't know, I was trying to figure out what should I do, and am I going to do something that's like going to really be what my audience, my quote unquote audience, my audience wants me to do? What even is that? Does that mean I'm going to do like I don't know, like a sci-fi movie because I've been in some sci-fi movies? Or am I going to do a superhero movie because I've been in a superhero movie? Or am I going to do a rom-com because I've been and none of that was really feeling like it. And it had been all this time since I'd acted, and where I landed was, I want to just do something that makes me sort of excited and feel challenged to act, just for the see what I can do to shake myself up as an actor. And this movie was where I landed. It had a lot to do with how the director shoots. He makes movies in an unconventional way, where he does these really long takes and doesn't stick to a script so much. There is a script, but he encourages all the actors to really break from the script and to just be and really immerse yourself in the character. And so the camera would roll for 20, 30, 40 minutes at a time, which, for comparison, like this is totally unheard of. I've never done that before in my whole 30 years of doing this. Normally you shoot for 60 seconds, maybe 3 minutes. It would be a long take. So to leave the camera running for 45 minutes is just like a whole other thing. And it really inspired me and it scared me. I was like, fuck, that sounds really hard. And the scenario of the story is this very kind of extreme, brutal scenario of a disaster
Hijacking.
on a plane. Yeah, plane hijacking. And the movie really wrestles with issues of racism and stereotypes and the way that different people perceive each other. And it's like super heavy movie. And I wanted that challenge, and it ended up as challenging as I thought it would be. It was probably the hardest one I've ever done. And we talked a second ago about things being hard when you have to fake it. So this is different than that. This was hard because it was so real. Staying in this extreme, brutal circumstance and immersing myself in it for all this time. It was really rewarding to push myself in that way. And the movie, I think it did okay. Like, it actually got, I think, better numbers than it came out on Amazon, and Amazon was happy with the numbers it did. It did better than it was supposed to for, the price they paid for it. But like, business numbers aside, it's not a movie for everyone because it's so intense. But as an experience, it was really rewarding.
I'm afraid to say it's a film I haven't seen because I get nervous about that scenario in real life.
Don't be afraid.
I can only deal with the anxiety around that.
I often don't watch movies that are that intense either, and certainly not like my wife does not like watching those kinds of movies. So that also limits the amount that I see them nowadays.
Yeah, once I had kids, it just, especially when they were little, it was hard for me to watch super violent things for a long time.
I have the same feeling. Yeah,
especially was like kids were involved in the violence. I just couldn't watch it. I just didn't. Yeah. It was too hard. The anxiety of it. You mentioned certain directors, and you've worked with some incredible directors. I mean, early in your career, you worked with Robert Redford, then Christopher Nolan and Aaron Sorkin. I'm just mentioning a few. You can mention more, but tell me about what a great director does for you as an actor. Like, how does Christopher? I mean, I imagine if Christopher Nolan's script comes your way, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. It's just like no brainer, like because of who he is, and what he does, and his kind of brilliance. But yeah, I mean, tell me a little bit more about your relationship with directors and how it changes how you perform.
Well, it really depends on the movie you're doing, of course, but I think the best directors, in my opinion, and this goes for kind of just the best leaders, are the ones who come with a very particular vision, but then are also flexible enough to change that vision and do so quickly if need be when something right comes into the picture that they weren't expecting. The bad version of that is a director that just doesn't know what they want at all, and is just always just kind of like following the latest shiny object, or only just listening to what other people tell them. But the good version is someone who has that balance. The other bad version is someone who just has a vision and doesn't care what anybody else says and is not interested in anybody else's contributions. And at that point, you're like, man, go write a novel. But someone who can find that balance, those are my favorite directors to work with, and the ones you mentioned do that, like Nolan or Spielberg, Zemeckis. These are all three of those directors had a remarkable ability to bring their exceedingly strong and specific vision, but also listen. Rian Johnson also he's a dear friend of mine, and he's maybe the person I've seen do this. He's amazing at this. He has a way, this sort of like kind of unassuming, humble way that he brings out the ingenuity of everybody and makes everybody feel inspired and safe and welcome to contribute their best. And he manages to have everybody contributing all their ideas, but also have such a particular vision in his mind and balance those and take the best of both and end up with a big mix of both sides at the end. And it's an incredible balance to strike, and yeah, that's what I've noticed most of my favorite directors have in common is that balance.
Yeah, I mentioned those directors. I failed to mention Steven Spielberg because, of course, Lincoln.
Him.
Yeah, just him, which is such an incredible film. One of my favorite films ever.
Me too, man. And Tony Kushner, by the way, one can't mention that film without mentioning the writer, Tony Kushner.
Yeah. And they've worked together on other films too. But like Daniel Day-Lewis, I mean, he was Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
By the way, when I'm curious, just because we're talking about it, was he Abraham Lincoln like Jim Carrey was Andy Kaufman on set, or Ray Fiennes was, the Nazi comedy? Like, because I don't, or was he just like, when the camera's off, he's like this Irish guy. I'm just wondering, like, because he was Lincoln in that film.
Yeah, it was an incredible performance, and I felt so privileged every day to be there. It is, again, a balance of the two sides you're talking about. What I admired about what Daniel was doing was he was extremely committed, but he wasn't gimmicky or silly about it. He didn't. It never seemed to me like he had something to prove. And I'm not saying that was the case of any of the other examples you gave. I wasn't there in those, but I have seen it before where actors want to do this thing and kind of like want everybody to know that they're that committed. And Daniel never struck me that way. For example, like you mentioned, when the cameras are off, does he become an Irish guy? So when the cameras weren't rolling, he mostly was pretty quiet. But he wasn't like, "Don't speak to me," or anything like that. But right. And I did have some conversations with him in between takes, and he was speaking in his Lincoln voice. He wasn't going back to his own Irish voice, which I think has just more to do with kind of momentum and muscle memory. It'd be
concentration,
weird whiplash to go back and forth. It's when you're doing a voice like that, a lot of it is actually physical. Just your like mouth and palate being in the right physical places, and you keep it that way. But he was open to hanging out and talking if you weren't like egregiously distracting. If I wouldn't have like said like, I wouldn't have shown him my phone and be like, "Hey, look at the Lakers score," or something like that. But if we were standing there on a set, like I remember one time we were standing there, we were in between takes, and I said something about the painting that was on the set, and we talked about it. And yeah, he talked about it in character, and I kind of stayed in character too, not because, and it's not that I called him Dad or he called me Robert or anything. It's just like, it's just momentum from, it's just the momentum of we're doing this right now. And it just made perfect sense, and it was, I found perfectly natural. And I know it's funny to kind of like make fun of actors who are doing quote unquote, I don't know, method acting. I don't really even know what that means. I never studied acting academically. But I understand what it means to have kind of a momentum of how you're being. And yeah, he would keep his momentum going.
I'm curious about the arc of your career because you've taken time off. You mentioned when you became a dad, but you've consistently been in films from the time you were, in your first film. I can't remember what it was, a Disney film or something in the early 90s. Forgive me because I should remember the first film you were in. But
that's okay.
But I mean, you've been consistently have had major roles in films throughout your career, and you've got more coming out, Beverly Hills Cop and others. And I wonder, because I've talked to so many actors on the show whose careers have ebbed and flowed, and this is normal. Everybody's career does, not everybody, but oftentimes, there are periods where you feel like, God, does anybody? We had Zooey Deschanel on the show, and before she got the show New Girl, she genuinely felt her career was over. She wasn't getting roles. She wasn't getting a lot of opportunities for new stuff. And but I look at your arc, and it seems like, I don't know, maybe that didn't happen to you. Maybe you or I don't know, did you ever feel like I don't know, you were out of favor, or you weren't hot, or that maybe the Hollywood world was kind of chewing you up and spitting you out?
Yeah, all the time, right? I mean,
really,
and sure, yeah, because I think if you go into that mindset, that's the only way you can fit that mindset. There's no winning. Once you sort of enter that kind of competitive mindset, there you can only ever see yourself as a loser, I think. And so the trick is to see that competitive mindset is only one way of seeing things, and not necessarily the most productive way or accurate way of seeing things. But yeah, I mean, of course, like I was definitely more popular, a number of years ago than I am now, and I don't know. Will I?
Do you think that's actually, like, does this data back that perception, or is that a self-perception?
Yeah, I would say that's, like, if we're talking about strict, like, business. But the thing is, like, I've been able to do the things I wanted to do. That to me, that's like the measurement I look at. I would probably be more popular if I did certain things that, like, frankly don't interest me as much, because that's just not my taste. And I got to make a weird artsy show, and I got to write and direct it and put it out on Apple. And was it a very popular show? No. And we didn't make a second season. And so, by certain measurements, that's less popular than, like, being on a show or being in a movie that's a big hit or does certain numbers. And that matters in a way, but what does it really matter? To me, what really matters is, well, do you get to do the degree to which the numbers matter is, like, do you get to do, what do I get to do next, basically? And at this point, like, I just got to play opposite Eddie Murphy. Like, he's one of my favorites of all time. I've written something that hopefully I get to, direct again. Like, I don't know if that'll end up working. Hopefully it does, but probably will in some capacity. And if not that one, then another one. And so I don't know. I don't worry too much about the fact that, like, I could point to any number of other actors who are, like, higher than me now on the food chain of popularity or hotness or whatever. Because ultimately, like, even if you get to the top of that heap, you'll look up and you'll see someone else that's hotter or that's better or that's something else. Like, that mindset of climbing and seeing it as sort of this linear competition. Like I said, once you see it as a competition, all you can do is lose. I really think that's pretty true. And so, I'm flattered that you would say to me, like, hey, it seems like you've been successful for a long time. I would say to someone who's listening to this, maybe in the world's, hierarchical perception of who's more successful in the entertainment industry, maybe they would place my name higher on that food chain than your name. But who the fuck cares? Like, what matters to me is, are you making art? Are you expressing yourself? Are you doing things that are fulfilling to you? And if you're doing that, then you're quote unquote winning. But I mean winning in a sort of a poetic way, because I mean it in a non-competitive way. You're doing the thing. And that's ultimately where you're going to find happiness.
I think that's a very, very healthy perspective, and I wonder how you got to that perspective, because you are in an environment surrounded by agents and people and pressure, and I think naturally the default is to be competitive, and you have to be to a certain extent to be successful, but there's different ways of being competitive, and so this kind of healthy perspective that you've developed, I have to imagine, was hard won.
Sure, and I could attribute it to lots of people. I don't think it's just something I came up with, and starting with my parents who never put the emphasis on that kind of winning. But like you mentioned, agents, you're right that the archetype for an agent is highly competitive. I will say I have a very special person for an agent. He's been my agent for a long time now, and he manages to do this wonderful thing. His name is Warren Zavala. And he's been my agent ever since I was, 20 or something, 21. I'm 42 now. And he does this thing where he'll present me with the facts of like, here's what the business sees, and here are the realities of this business move or that business move and what options it will open or close to you. Because he knows that what's important to me is what am I able to do? What can my next creative opportunity be? So he's very realistic with me. He doesn't sugarcoat it or say, you're golden, baby. None of that. It's always like, this is the reality of the business. And so if we're making this decision, here are the business considerations. But I entirely respect who you are and what you do, and you should do you. And it's something that maybe Hollywood would be a less toxic place if more agents were like him.
I read a quote of yours which I just thought was so interesting. You said at a certain point when I'm paraphrasing, but it's like, I became a better actor when I stopped looking at my fellow actors as competitors rather than collaborators. And I can understand that impulse to see another actor and just think, oh my God, they're so much better than me. I've got to, I don't know, right? Tell me about how you kind of changed that mindset around.
Yeah, there's like this phrase, stealing. You know, they say like, oh, that actor stole the show or stole the movie or stole that scene.
Yes.
As if the actors there were all like trying to steal something from each other or something. Yeah. And I guess maybe there are some actors who do see it that way, but I don't really think most of them. Most of them are pretty like gentle folk in my experience. Most, not all, most. And we're all collaborating. That's what we're all doing. And ultimately, all the actors are just helping the director. If you're on a film set, theater is something different, where the actors are really the ones who are delivering the work of art directly to the audience. But on a film set, the actors are just gathering ingredients for the director to then make the movie. And we're all just working together. And that's what's fun about it. That's what's so transcendent and beautiful about the experience. It's what I remember about, we were talking earlier about being a little kid and working. The thing I remember most from my very first day on the set was that all these people were here and they all have a job to do. And I'm here and I have a job to do. And we all have to do it together in order to succeed. And if one of us messes up, then we're letting everyone else down. We're all rooting for each other, and we're all kind of pulling together. That feeling is, to me, the reward. That's what I'm after. It's like it's why I love doing this. It feels so good when you're in those moments with your fellow. It's not just cast, it's cast and crew. It's everybody that's there. Something happens. They say rolling and everyone gets quiet. Why do they get quiet? Everyone knows, everyone's together. And your fellow actors, like one of the worst sins you can kind of commit as an actor is to sort of flake on the other side. What that means is when you're shooting a scene, you know, they'll shoot the master shot where they see everybody, and then they go into, they call coverage, the kind of the single shots. Okay, now we're going to do a shot on this actor, and then we're going to turn around and do the shot on the other actor. And when the shot's not on you, you still stand there behind the camera and you give a full-on performance for your fellow actor, who's the one being recorded right then. And then when it's your turn, they come and do the same for you. And if you come in and you like phone in the other side, the other side is when you're not on camera, it sucks. And it's not like it's not cool to do that to your fellow actor. And people don't do it. Like I can count on I could probably count on one hand the number of times that's happened to me, because we don't do that to each other. And it's one of the lovely things about sort of the culture of actors is we come and do the other side for each other. And so I don't see it as a competition. I know it's fun to like have awards shows where we talk about winners, et cetera, and it's fun to talk about losers and whatever. But to me, that's all kind of clickbait.
Joseph Gordon-Levitt, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's really, really a pleasure talking to you, Guy.
Hey, thanks so much for watching my conversation with actor Joseph Gordon-Levitt. His latest film is Beverly Hills Cop, Axel F. You can also find his online community at hitrecord.org. We're going to put those links in our show notes. You can find that at thegreatcreators.com/Gordon-Levitt. You can find more conversations like this one at our podcast. It's called The Great Creators, available wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find lots more of these conversations at our YouTube channel or by visiting thegreatcreators.com. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. This is also an audio podcast. Look for The Great Creators wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Guy Raz. Thanks for watching. See you back here next time.